Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, Shut Up and Read. As you can tell from the title of this video, I'll be doing my super late August wrap-up slash books I read video because I finally caught up to actually doing all the reviews for the books that I read in August. And I'm the type of person that I'm very methodical, so I need to write a review in order of which books I read. So the few books that I picked out to talk about in this video, some of them were towards the end of August, and so I had to wait until I finished writing all the reviews before I was able to actually get the notes down for this video. And finally guys, so anyways, let's just get right into it. So first and foremost, some stats. So I managed to read 31 books in 31 days, which I mean is amazing. Like, I am just shocked by how much I read, especially when I counted the fact that I was basically doing some hardcore packing and moving for about 2 weeks or so. And so I don't know how I did it, but I managed to do it somehow, and I'm so proud of myself. But to break that down, out of the 31 books that I read, 13 of them were audiobooks, 4 of them were ebooks, and 14 were physical books. I don't remember exactly how many were graphic novels. I did read a number of graphic novels in there as well, but I did not put the stats down for that. And then in terms of the star ratings, I actually had a pretty decent month. I had 1 1-star read, 6 2-star reads, 9 3-star reads, 1 3.5-star read, 10 4 stars, and then 3 5 stars. And then there's one more book that I technically haven't rated yet because it's the first of a series, and I tend to like to read the entire series before I decide how I rate each book in the series, because sometimes as the series continue it would change my opinion. So I'm waiting for me to actually finish reading the rest of that series before I actually rate that one book. Also, please ignore any other sounds in this house because there are other people in this house and I'm not the only one here. So I already told them to be on the DL for now, but like, who knows, guys. Okay, so for today I have 7 books slash series that I want to share and discuss with you guys out of 31, which is not that many to be honest, but I mean, to be fair though, some of them are series. So of course the first series I want to share is the Court of Thorn and Roses series by Sarah J Maas. This is the first book, Court of Thorn and Roses. This is the second book, Court of Mist and Fury, and this is the third book, Court of Wings and Ruin. I obviously gave these books 5 stars. I mean, they were just simply amazing. I mean, this first book I technically read sometime in July for the reading rush, but these 2 books, guys, oh my god, I read them in August and I have no words. I just like love the whole series so much, and I'm actually kind of holding off of reading on the novella right now because I just don't want this world to end. So because I read these 2 books in August, I'm going to mostly focus on these 2 books and not the first book that I read in July. If you want more thoughts on this book, I will link above my reading rush vlog because I think I talked about this book a little bit more in depth during that time period. So I'm not going to talk too much in terms of what these books are about because it's a series. This is book 2, this is book 3. I don't want to spoil anything in case for those who haven't read it yet, but it talks about fairies, guys, and that's kind of all you really need to know about the series in general. And some people either love it and some people either hate it, and I fall in the love it category. So there are kind of 2 things I want to talk about specifically in this last book. So I gave the whole series 5 stars, but I would say this last book is more of like a 4.5, mainly for 2 reasons. And this is not really a spoiler because at the end of the day it's about fairies, there's a war involved, and so there's 2 things that happened that I was kind of about. So there's 2 characters in here that died. I mean, there's a war, guys, people are gonna die, and so there's 2 characters in here that died that I felt was just needless, and I actually was really upset about it because they were such interesting characters, and I feel like the author could have expanded so much on their character development, their character arc, and the fact that they just died like that, I was like, I don't know, guys, I just felt like there could have been so much potential for those 2 characters. And then on the flip side, there are 2 more characters that didn't die that I felt should have died. I mean, granted, like, I'm glad they didn't die because I do like the characters, but the way how they come back and the way how they didn't die or whatever, just, I don't know, it just didn't really explain that well to me, especially because the other 2 characters died. So those are the only 2 things that was kind of a miss for me. But other than that though, like, I love the series so much, guys, and yeah, I would probably say this is one of my favorite reads for the entire year. Definitely top 10 for sure. And then in terms of my favorite character, I would probably say it'd be Reese, but I love Cassian and Azriel and everyone else as well. I mean, they're just so dynamic, and I love the obstacles that they go through, as well as the friendships that they form with the other courts, and just all the journey that they went through. Just so good, guys. I mean, to be fair, I feel like this is everyone's favorite book, which, I mean, I think this would be my favorite book for the entire series as well, but everyone's favorite chapter, I think it's like 55 or something. My favorite chapter is the chapter prior to that, because that is a chapter where everything is kind of explained and understood, whereas chapter 55 is a chapter that happens after everything is explained, and everyone loves that one, and I agree. I can see why, but I think my favorite chapter is the one prior to that, if that makes any sense. Then the next book that I want to discuss is The 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Harrow. This book is so beautiful. So this book follows a young girl who is kind of curious, and from a very young age she has been raised by a benefactor because her father is always traveling for work and her mother has been gone at a very young age. And one day she finds this mysterious book that discusses about doorways into other worlds, and before she knows it, she enters this world of magic, adventure, and love. That's probably the briefest summary that I can give you without spoiling anything, because this is definitely a book where it's better off not knowing too much, because it's a journey, guys. I mean, in the beginning I struggled with it. I think I read the first 2 chapters and then this other weird chapter that I was like, I don't know what's going on, before things started to really click in place for me. I would say about 50 to 100 pages was when things started to click for me, and by the end of this book, oh my god, guys, I was just like, everything just made sense. And this book, guys, I gave it 4 stars. So my biggest issue that I mentioned very briefly already is the format of this book. So the way how this book is broken up is the fact that there's chapters, and then somewhere between some of these chapters there will be these random chapters that is from the book that January picks up. So in the beginning I'm like, I don't understand where these chapters are coming from. What exactly is the purpose of these chapters? And then as you continue reading, you finally, like, I finally understood everything. I want to say like more than halfway through the book, when the importance of those random chapters start to make so much sense. And the thing is, the direction of this book and the way that it took me, it was so surprising, but in a very good way. And then there's also this romance that I was so invested in, and that's all I can really say because I don't want to spoil anything. But I would say that the strongest part of this book is the writing. It's very lyrical, it's very poetic, it's very beautiful, and if you like writing like that, then I think you will really enjoy this book. Usually for me, it's a hit or miss. Some of these writings I really adore, and sometimes a little bit too flowery for me to really grasp, but in this case, I think it was a really, really good medium, because the beginning, like I said already, was a little bit slow for me, but once it started to pick up towards the end, everything just kind of flowed well together, and it was just a really, really beautifully written book, guys. Then the next book that I want to discuss is Tiger Queen by Annie Sullivan. So this book is a retelling of a short story called The Lady and the Tiger, where the king basically allows the accused to choose between 2 doors. One is the lady, where basically the accused will have the chance to marry the lady, and the other one is a tiger, which obviously means death. So depending on which door the accused picks is basically where his fate lies. So this book follows Princess Kateri, whose kingdom lies in the desert, and to prove her right to rule, she must defeat a series of opponents by her 16th birthday. Ruling her kingdom will finally allow her to save her people who are suffering from drought and lack of water, as well as keep the promise that she made to her mother all those years ago. Unfortunately though, things keep getting worse, and there's also this gang of desert boys who continuously steals water from the well that ends up leading to reduced rations. And so Kateri finally has that one last opponent to defeat by the time of her 16th birthday, but when she finds out who this opponent is, she realizes that there's no way she can beat this person. So she ends up escaping to the desert to find the desert boys for help. And of course, as the book continues, so much other stuff happens from there. This book was really engaging and really, really interesting. I read it as a buddy read, and we were all surprised. I think it was like 4 of us that buddy read this, and we were surprised by how fast-paced this book was, but not too fast in the sense that you're lost, but it was a good medium of having a lot of action, adventure, and obstacles, as well as understanding what the book is about. So right from the beginning, we were all sucked into the story and the conflict that was being presented. I also really liked the romance in here and thought it was a really good enemies to lovers trope. The only downside I had with this book was the fact that I thought it was a little bit too short. I think it's just over 300 pages or something like that, and I thought this book could have used just a little bit more to fully develop the characters a little bit, especially the relationships and dynamics between the desert boys and Kateri and all those other people. But unfortunately, it was just a little bit too short for that. But other than that, I really enjoyed this book, and I gave this book 4 stars. So if you enjoy retellings, then I definitely recommend this book. The next book that I want to discuss is Stormrise by Julian Bomey. Bome. I'm really hoping I pronounced her last name correctly. So this book is kind of another retelling. It's supposed to be inspired by 12th Night, but for me, I would say it more closely resembled Mulan. So this book follows a girl called Rain who could have been a combat master if it wasn't for the fact that she is a girl. And as a female, her future really only has one option, well technically two if you want to be specific. One is to be a wife and the other is to be a mother. One day a war breaks out and every household must provide an able male to fight, and then that's when she realizes two things. One is that her twin brother Storm is disabled and therefore he cannot go. I mean, he can go, but he would definitely die right from the beginning, and she knows that. And two, she can use this opportunity to prove her worth. So she ends up using these dragon powder to help her disguise herself as a boy. This way she can go in place of Storm as the able male in her household to join the war. And as she trains alongside the males of her regiment, she starts to hear this voice of a dragon that she never really truly believed. So even though she was taking this dragon powder, she was always skeptical that this dragon powder isn't really from a dragon. She just assumed it was from something else, like an herb or something like that, until she starts to hear the voice of a dragon in her head. And of course, from there, she ends up discovering that dragons have actually been asleep for centuries, and they actually might be the key to surviving and winning this war. This is another book that I really enjoyed. I really like the whole trope of a young woman disguising herself as a male to fight for her country, aka Mulan, guys. Which is why I feel like this book is more similar to Mulan than 12th Night, which, I mean, to be fair, I don't really know what 12th Night is about, so I can't really say. But for me, this one was just more closely resembled to Mulan than anything else. And I thought the pacing of the story was really well done. It wasn't too fast and it wasn't too slow. I also really enjoy reading about the dragons as well as the friendships that Rain developed while in training. I also really like the fact that there is a romance in this book, but it was definitely not the main focus of it. It was more of a subplot, which really helped enhance the story instead of overtake the story, if that makes any sense. But the thing is, those were really all the only aspects of this book that I liked, which is why I ultimately gave this book 3.5 stars. The issue for me is that I didn't really love the world building, and I never got a sense of the world that the author created. There was some Asian-esque elements to it, mainly due to the type of fighting and combat that they were using, but that was really it. Like, this book could have easily taken place in some, I don't know, this foreign planet for all I know. I also did not like the way how they treated women, and it was just so demeaning. It wasn't for the fact that it's because of the different world, different culture, all that stuff. I mean, that's fine. I feel like I understand that different culture is very different, but my biggest issue was the fact that this author just kept on repeating it over and over again. And that was my biggest issue, because I was like, I understand that this culture finds women to be underneath them, they find them to be demeaning, they're just basically stupid that they can't even do basic tasks, but I just didn't see the point in having the author just keep constantly bring it up with the way how the soldiers reacted, how the men reacted, just everything in general. I just didn't see the point, I guess. Oh, and another thing that I do want to point out for people who are interested in trigger warnings is that there is an attempted sexual assault in this book, so definitely be aware of that. So overall, at the end of the day, I still enjoyed this book. I just didn't love it. Okay, so the next book that I want to discuss, and this is a lot of tea, but that is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I was one of the few lucky ones to get a copy at BEA, which honestly I'm just so grateful for, especially because Leigh Bardugo is one of my favorite authors of all time. But this book was just not what I expected. So this book is Leigh Bardugo's first adult fantasy. It follows a woman called Alex, who is a freshman at Yale. Prior to attending Yale, she was a sole survivor of a horrible homicide involving multiple people. And somehow on her hospital bed, she is then offered a full ride to Yale. But the catch is that now she needs to be the one to monitor the ongoings of Yale's secret societies. And there are 8 houses and 8 secret societies, I guess. And before she knows it, she is deep in occult practices. So this book was one of my most anticipated reads of 2019. I thought this would be a 5-star for sure, but unfortunately I gave this book 3 stars. It's not like it was a bad book. It just did not live up to its hype, I guess, or at least my expectations of it. First and foremost, I do want to say that prior to reading this book, I would say that a few days before I started to read this book, there were just so much drama going on Twitter about all the trigger warnings and everything, but honestly, I thought they were incredibly over-exaggerated and actually very misleading, because due to all of those warnings and exaggerations, I went into this book thinking, oh my god, it's gonna be super dark, it's gonna be super gritty, it's gonna be really intense, and it wasn't any of that. I mean, yes, there were definitely dark things to this book, there's a lot of intense stuff going on for sure, but the amount of trigger warnings and the drama that ensued from that was very, very exaggerated, and honestly I feel like it changed my expectations. Like I feel like I went in it not knowing all of that drama, then my experience of the book would have been a lot different, because of that, my expectations for this book just went so far and beyond what I imagined. I was expecting or imagining all these crazy scenarios, and what actually happened was just so, like, I mean, it was dark, don't get me wrong, it's still a very dark book, just not to the extent that I was imagining, I guess, or like my expectations due to all the drama that ensued. I really hope I'm explaining it well here. But putting the trigger warnings and all of that drama aside, my biggest problem with this book was just how slow this book was. This book is 500 pages, about 500 pages, and you could have easily cut it down to about 300 and it would have been totally fine, in my opinion at least. I just felt like a lot of what happened was just filler and it didn't need to be there, and I just think it was just really slow, and I feel like without some of this filler it would have just gone a lot faster and more fast-paced, and therefore it would have been far more interesting. Another issue that I had was just how confusing it was. So this book follows multiple timelines as well as multiple POVs. One is the fall, which is Darlington's timeline, and the other one is the spring, which is Alex's timeline. But the issue is that it's not even alternating timelines. It's kind of like sometimes it'll be a lot of Alex's timeline and sometimes it'll be a few far between for Darlington's timeline. So it's not evenly spread out. And so I would say Alex's character was definitely more prominent in this book, even though it technically followed two characters. And also the fact that everyone had different names. So there are these nicknames that the societies went by. There's like code names, and then there's their actual names, and then there's their first names or their last names. And it was just really confusing, especially when you're just thrown into this world and you're just like, what the fuck is going on? But the redeeming factor is the fact that I did like the setting. It was very atmospheric and I did enjoy reading about the characters. But I would definitely say that I preferred Darlington's character over Alex's character, but unfortunately Alex was definitely the more prominent POV, and that was kind of a pity for me because I just didn't care about her as much. So that was one thing. But I did enjoy reading about both of the characters, especially finding out what happened to Alex before she got into Yale, like that horrific, horrendous homicide that happened to her. I also did enjoy reading about the magic system and just the occult in general, in terms of the secret societies, what their differences were and how that all worked, because that was actually a really, really fascinating part of the story. But again, I feel like that explanation and kind of discovery of how all these societies worked took a really long time to process and to get through. So I don't know, end of the day it was okay. It's not like I didn't like this book or anything. I don't know if I pick up the sequel. I think I will pick up the sequel just because it's Leigh Bardugo, but I think I want to wait until everyone else has read it and kind of get a gauge on how they think and what they think about the sequel before I will pick it up, because as of right now it's definitely not a priority for me at all. So the next book that I want to discuss is Sorcerer Thrones by Margaret Rogerson. This book, guys, oh my god, one of my favorites of 2019 for sure. So for the longest time, Elizabeth has been raised with the knowledge that sorcerers are evil while living in the great library her entire life. And having grown up in one of these great libraries, she has known about these magical grimoires that whisper, and if provoked, they can turn into these monstrous beings. And her current dream is to become a warden of the library, which means that she is tasked with protecting her kingdom from these magical grimoires. However, something happens and a magical grimoire escapes, and she is somehow implicated in this crime. And to face justice for this supposed crime that she has committed, she must go to the capital. But unfortunately, something happens again, and now she has no one to rely on except for a sorcerer called Nathaniel and his demonic servant called Silas. And as the book continues, she finds herself in this conspiracy with the world at stake, as well as the fact that everything that she learned growing up might not actually be true. So this book, guys, like I already said, is so good. 5 stars all the way. Oh my god, such a good book. My favorite part would definitely be Silas. I just love him so much. His demeanor, his character, his personality is just like, I just love him. I think he is by far my favorite character in this entire book. Like, I want another book just focusing on his character, and I'm hoping that one day Margaret Rogerson will decide to have a spin-off book or a series or whatever it is, continuation, and it will feature Silas, or at least give me more Silas, essentially. So yeah, I'm really hoping for that one day. But other than Silas though, I did really love the banter between Elizabeth and Nathaniel, as well as Nathaniel's relationship with Silas, because it wasn't just a master-servant kind of relationship. It was more of a brother best friend kind of relationship, and it was just so endearing to see and read about. I also really love the plot with its twists and turns, and one unique that I found really interesting was the fact that this villain is actually revealed really early on. So rather than the whole book trying to figure out who this villain is, The book mostly focused on the problem and trying to rectify and save the world essentially. And the world and this writing was just so enchanting. It was so easy for me to be completely immersed with the story and just fall in love with the world and the characters and just everything about this book, guys. So if you haven't picked up this book yet, definitely read it. Like, I was actually a little bit worried because I thought it was very overhyped, but this is worth all the hype, guys. Like, it's just so good. The last and final book that I want to discuss in this video is The Stormcrow by Kaylin Josephson. So far, far away, there's a tropical kingdom called Rodair, where magical crows are essential to their everyday lives. For example, they have these sun crows for healing, storm crows for creating all these storms and watering the plants and crops. One night though, something tragic happens when a neighboring kingdom called Lucian invades this country, this kingdom, and destroys everything, including all the magical crows, and thus effectively ending Rodair's lifestyle. The queen is also murdered and left behind are her two daughters. One is Kaliza, who is trying to run the kingdom in the aftermath, and the other is Thea, who is just too shocked and depressed to even continue living. Unfortunately though, things get even worse, because Kaliza is forced to arrange a marriage alliance with the cruel Prince of Lucian with Thea to even garner a sense of peace between these two kingdoms. And because of this development, Thea finally wakes up from her depression, and upon stumbling upon a single Stormcrow's egg, she and her sister devises a plan to hopefully save their kingdom once and for all. This is another book where it was highly anticipated and it didn't quite live up to my expectations. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. I mean, I still enjoyed it, I just didn't love it as much as I hoped I would. There were two aspects to this book that I really enjoyed. One is the depression representation and how realistic it was in terms of Thea's response to the devastation that happened to her own kingdom. And the other aspect was the magical crows. I just thought this was a really cool concept, and I just liked learning about all the different types of these crows and how useful they were. But unfortunately though, I feel like those are the only two things that I really liked about this book. So this is a YA fantasy, and the thing is, I felt like this book didn't really bring anything new to this genre. It was just a typical YA fantasy book. I also didn't really care much for the romance or the characters, to be honest, and they kind of go hand in hand, because the character that I'm just really confused about is Erison. He is the cruel prince of Lucian. I'm really hoping that's how you pronounce his name. He was just a really odd character, and the reason why I brought him up for the romance too is because there is a love triangle in this book, and he is 1/3 of this love triangle, and I don't know, his character was just so odd to me. So in the beginning, he is seen as this very cruel prince. The way how he acts, his demeanor, his personality just seems like he is just the worst person in existence. Then the second half, his personality just completely changes. He becomes super charming, he becomes easy to please, just, I don't know. It was just a really weird character development for me. Honestly, it could have just been a completely different character for all I know. That being said though, I am still intrigued enough to pick up the sequel, mainly because I am curious enough to find out what happens next, as well as the development of these magical crows. So, like, it's still an interesting book, and I do think that people should read it, but it just wasn't as loved as I had hoped it would. Like, I don't know, I just thought the whole magical crows would be super cool, but like overall as a book, I was just not that impressed with it. So anyways, those are all the books I want to discuss in this video. Those are very diverse range of books, I want to say. I feel like those are books that I just absolutely adore, like some of my favorites of 2019, and then there were a few books that just didn't quite live up to my expectations. So let me know down below if you have read any of these books that I mentioned here. If you have, do you agree with my sentiments? Do you not agree with my sentiments? What do you think? If there are any books that you haven't read yet that I have read and discussed in this video, which one are you most anticipating for? But anyways, that's all I have to say for this video. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe down below, don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!